Lieutenant Sarah Chen pushed through the crowded mess hall, her tray balanced carefully as Snickers followed in her wake. The other pilots barely tried to hide their amusement when she passed their table. "There goes Eagle-7," someone whispered, and the nickname sparked fresh laughter. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her jaw tightened. The call sign had started as a joke 3 months ago during flight simulations. While other pilots earned names like Viper, Thunder, or Razor, Sarah had been stuck with Eagle-7 after a particularly brutal training exercise where she'd been shot down 7 times in the Terran Defense Academy's fighter pilot program was notorious for its washout rate. 80% of cadets never made it to graduation, and those who did often found themselves assigned to cargo runs or planetary defense, rather than the prestigious deep space squadrons. Sarah had fought tooth and nail just to get this far, and she wasn't about to let a bunch of privileged academy brats break her spirit. She found an empty table in the corner and sat down, picking at her synthesized protein meal. The taste was barely tolerable, but it provided the nutrients needed for the intense physical demands of pilot training. Around her, conversations buzzed about the latest news from the frontier worlds. The hegemony was expanding again. 3 more human colonies had gone silent in the past month. Their last transmissions cut short by electromagnetic interference that could only mean one thing: alien warships. The enemy had superior technology, faster ships, and energy weapons that could punch through human shields like paper. Humanity's only advantage was their stubborn refusal to give up, but even that was beginning to wear thin. "Mind if we sit?" Sarah looked up to see Marcus Webb, one of the top cadets in their class. His call sign was Phantom, and he'd earned it through his uncanny ability to slip past enemy sensors during war games. Behind him stood 2 other pilots she recognized but had never spoken to. "Free Galaxy," Sarah replied, gesturing to the empty chairs. Marcus sat down across from her, his expression serious. "Listen, Chen, I know the others give you grief about the Eagle-7 thing, but I've been watching your scores. You're getting better." "A lot better?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. Marcus Webb didn't talk to bottom-tier pilots unless he wanted something. "What's your point?" "My point is that maybe the instructors are seeing something the rest of us aren't." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Word is they're putting together a special squadron. Volunteers only. Deep space reconnaissance behind enemy lines." The other pilots at the table shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew what deep space reconnaissance really meant. It was a suicide mission dressed up in military jargon. The hegemony's sensor nets were too advanced, their response times too fast. Any human ship that ventured into occupied territory had about as much chance of returning as a snowball had of surviving re-entry. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because they're not looking for the best pilots," Marcus said quietly. "They're looking for pilots who think differently, pilots who've learned to adapt, to survive when everything goes wrong." He glanced around the table. "Pilots who've been shot down 7 times and keep getting back up." Sarah felt something stir in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. "When do they announce the selection process?" "Tomorrow morning." "But Sarah," Marcus's expression grew grave, "you need to understand what you'd be signing up for. The mortality rate for deep space recon is 97%. The average mission duration before contact is lost is 6 days. No one who's volunteered for this program has ever come home." The mess hall suddenly felt very quiet despite the dozens of conversations happening around them. Sarah stared down at her barely touched meal, thinking about the 3 colonies that had gone silent, thinking about the families who would never know what happened to their loved ones, thinking about humanity slowly losing ground to an enemy they barely understood. "I appreciate the heads up," she said finally. Marcus nodded and stood to leave. "For what it's worth, I think Eagle-7 is a better call sign than most people realize. Eagles don't just fly high, they hunt, and they never give up on their prey." After he left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts. The other pilots gradually filtered out of the mess hall, heading to evening study sessions or recreational activities. Sarah remained at her table, staring out through the viewport at the starfield beyond. Earth hung in the distance, a blue marble that looked impossibly fragile against the vast darkness of space. Somewhere out there, the hegemony was planning their next move, consolidating their hold on human territory. Every day they waited, more colonies fell silent. More families disappeared into the void. Sarah's personal communicator chimed softly. She glanced down to see a message from her younger brother back on Earth. David was starting his final year of engineering school, planning to join the Terran fleet as a ship designer. His message was full of excitement about his latest project and questions about life at the Academy. She started to type a response, then stopped. How could she explain that everything they'd been told about the war was sanitized propaganda, that humanity was losing badly, that their supposedly advanced fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that treated human technology like toys? Instead, she wrote back with encouraging words about his studies and reminded him to visit their parents more often. Some truths were too heavy to share, especially with people you loved. The mess hall was nearly empty now, just a few late diners and the cleaning crew preparing for the next shift. Sarah finally pushed her tray away and headed for her quarters. Tomorrow would bring the announcement Marcus had warned her about, and she already knew what her answer would be. As she walked through the corridors of the academy, Sarah passed the memorial wall where the names of graduates killed in action were displayed in holographic letters. The list had grown disturbingly long in recent months. Each name represented someone who had sat in these same hallways, eaten in the same mess hall, dreamed of defending humanity among the stars. Sarah paused in front of the newest additions to the wall. Lieutenant Torres shot down over Kepler 442b. Commander Washington lost with all hands during the evacuation of New Geneva. Captain Kim, missing in action after volunteering for a reconnaissance mission that sounded remarkably similar to what Marcus had described. She reached out and touched the wall, feeling the slight vibration of the holographic projectors beneath her fingertips. Tomorrow she would volunteer to join them. Not because she thought she could succeed where others had failed, but because someone had to try. Someone had to be willing to fly into the darkness and never come back. Eagle-7 was ready to hunt. The briefing room was smaller than Sarah expected, containing only 12 chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a holographic display. She arrived early and chose a seat in the back row, watching as other volunteers filtered in. Some faces she recognized from the academy. Others were clearly older pilots with real combat experience, their uniforms bearing the worn patches and subtle scars that marked veteran spacers. Commander Victoria Hayes entered precisely at 800 hours. Sarah had heard stories about Hayes but never seen her in person. The woman was a legend in the Terran fleet, one of the few pilots to survive multiple engagements with hegemony forces. A jagged scar ran from her left temple to her jaw, a souvenir from a cockpit breach during the Battle of Titan's Gate. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes began without preamble, "you're here because you volunteered for Operation Nightfall. Before we continue, I want to be absolutely clear about what that means." She gestured, and the holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of known space. Red zones marked hegemony-controlled territory, spreading like an infection across what had once been the outer colonies. Blue zones showed remaining human settlements, noticeably smaller and more scattered than they'd been just 6 months ago. "The hegemony has been systematically isolating our colonies before destroying them," Hayes continued. "They jam communications, eliminate supply lines, then move in for the kill. Our intelligence on their methods is virtually non-existent, because no one has ever gotten close enough to observe and return." She highlighted a section of space deep in the red zone. "Your mission will be to penetrate their territory using experimental stealth technology and gather actionable intelligence on hegemony fleet movements, base locations, and tactical capabilities. The data you collect could turn the tide of this war." A pilot Sarah didn't recognize raised his hand. "Commander, what's our extraction plan?" Hayes' expression didn't change. "There isn't one. This is a one-way mission. Your ships will be equipped with quantum burst transmitters capable of sending data packets across interstellar distances. Once you've gathered sufficient intelligence, you'll transmit everything back to Fleet Command and continue operating until your ship is destroyed or your life support fails." The room fell silent. Sarah had expected this, but hearing it stated so bluntly made her stomach tighten. Around her, she could see other volunteers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "I won't sugarcoat this," Hayes said. "The survival rate for deep space reconnaissance is statistically 0. The longest any operative has remained in contact is 8 days. Most are lost within 72 hours. She paused, letting that sink in. "If anyone wants to withdraw, now is the time." 2 pilots stood and walked out without a word. Hayes watched them go without comment, then turned back to the remaining volunteers. "For those staying, let's discuss the technology you'll be using." The display changed to show a sleek fighter unlike anything Sarah had seen before. It was smaller than standard interceptors, with an angular hull that seemed to bend, light around its edges. The Ghost class reconnaissance fighter uses adaptive camouflage, plating, and a revolutionary new engine design that produces minimal electromagnetic signature. In theory, you should be invisible to most sensor arrays unless they know exactly where to look. In theory? Someone asked. The technology is untested in combat conditions, Hayes admitted. You'll be the field test. The ships are also lightly armed and unshielded to minimize their sensor footprint. Speed and stealth are your only protection. Sarah studied the technical specifications as they scrolled past. The Ghost fighters were marvels of engineering, incorporating advances that pushed human technology to its absolute limits, but they were also fragile, dependent on systems that had never been proven in real combat. What about the pilots? Asked Marcus, who had taken a seat near the front. How many are you selecting? 7, Hayes replied. 1 for each target sector. You'll launch simultaneously from different points to maximize our intelligence gathering and minimize the chance of total mission failure. 7 pilots, 7 ships, 7 sectors of enemy space where humanity had never dared to venture. Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her as the full scope of the mission became clear. They weren't just volunteers, they were sacrifices. Human lives thrown into the darkness in the desperate hope that their deaths might buy enough knowledge to save everyone else. Training begins immediately, Hayes continued. You'll have 2 weeks to master the Ghost Fighter's systems and memorize your operational parameters. The ships are fueled with experimental matter ASH antimatter drives that provide incredible range but cannot be refueled in the field. Once you launch, you have approximately 30 days of operation before your power cells expire. The briefing continued for another hour, covering technical details, communication protocols, and mission objectives. Sarah absorbed every word, but part of her mind wandered to thoughts of home. She had planned to call her parents after the meeting, to hear their voices one more time before the training lockdown began. Now she realized that conversation would effectively be her goodbye. When Hayes dismissed them, the remaining volunteers filed out in small groups, their conversations muted and serious. Sarah lingered behind, studying the holographic display that still showed the Ghost Fighter's specifications. Second thoughts, Lieutenant? Sarah turned to find Hayes approaching, her footsteps silent on the briefing room's carpeted floor. Up close, the commander's presence was even more intimidating. Her eyes held the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much death, from making decisions that cost lives. No, ma'am, Sarah replied. Just trying to understand why I'm here. Hayes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because your instructors flagged you as someone who doesn't quit. Your test scores aren't the highest, your tactical rankings aren't impressive, but you have something most pilots lack. She paused. You've learned to function when everything goes wrong. With respect, Commander, that doesn't sound like much of a qualification. On the contrary, Lieutenant, in deep space everything always goes wrong. Equipment fails, sensors give false readings, navigation systems develop errors. The pilots who survive are the ones who can adapt, improvise, and keep fighting when their ship is falling apart around them. Hayes moved closer to the holographic display. Your call sign is Eagle-7, correct? Yes, ma'am. Do you know why your instructors chose that designation? Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Because I was shot down 7 times in my first simulation exercise. Partially correct. But did you know that you hold the Academy record for fastest recovery time after a simulated kill? Every time you were shot down, you had your backup systems online and your ship combat ready faster than any other cadet in history. Hayes turned to face her. 7 kills that would have ended most pilots' careers, and you turned each one into a learning experience. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had always assumed the instructors saw her repeated failures as evidence of incompetence. The possibility that they had been watching her resilience instead had never occurred to her. The hegemony has superior technology, superior numbers, and superior tactics, Hayes continued. But they've never faced an enemy that refuses to stay dead. They've never encountered humans who can lose every conventional engagement and still find a way to win. She gestured toward the door. Your training starts at 600 tomorrow. Don't be late, Eagle-7. As Sarah walked back to her quarters, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Pride. Not the hollow satisfaction of completing another simulation or passing another test, but genuine pride in who she was, and what she represented. The other pilots could keep their impressive scores and prestigious call signs. She was Eagle-7, and that meant something after all. Her personal communicator chimed again, another message from David. This time she didn't hesitate before responding. She told him she loved him, that she was proud of his achievements, and that no matter what happened, he should never give up on his dreams. Some messages were too important to delay, even if they might be the last ones you ever sent. The Ghost Fighter's cockpit was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Instead of traditional displays and controls, the pilot interface consisted of a neural link headset and haptic feedback gloves that translated thought into action. The first time she connected to the system, the sensation nearly overwhelmed her. "Easy, Eagle-7," came the voice of Chief Technical Officer Morgan through her headset. "The neural interface takes some getting used to. Start with basic navigation commands." Sarah closed her eyes and focused on moving forward. The fighter responded instantly, accelerating so smoothly she barely felt the motion. Around her, the advanced stealth systems painted a three-dimensional picture of space directly into her consciousness, showing her the training ground in ways that traditional sensors never could. "Remarkable," she whispered. "I can feel the gravitational fields, the electromagnetic radiation from nearby ships. It's like the entire electromagnetic spectrum is visible." "That's the adaptive sensor array," Morgan explained. "It reads quantum fluctuations in space-time itself. The technology is based on theoretical physics that we didn't even understand 5 years ago. The hegemony invasion forced us to advance faster than anyone thought possible." Sarah practiced basic maneuvers for the first hour, learning to think her ship through space rather than flying it. The Ghost Fighter responded to intention rather than input, making it incredibly agile but requiring a completely different mindset from traditional piloting. During a brief break, she met the other selected volunteers in the training facility's briefing room. They were an interesting mix of personalities and backgrounds. Marcus was there, of course, along with 2 veteran pilots from the Frontier Defense Forces and 3 Academy graduates she'd never spoken to before. Lieutenant James Rodriguez had the call sign Wraith and came from the mining colonies near Proxima Centauri. His family had been evacuated when hegemony forces overran that sector, making this mission deeply personal for him. Captain Elena Vasquez was a former test pilot whose call sign, Phoenix, reflected her ability to bring damaged ships home against impossible odds. The others were younger, closer to Sarah's age but with better training records. Lieutenant Tom Harrison, Falcon, Lieutenant Amy Park, Viper, and Lieutenant David Murphy, Shark, had all graduated in the top 10% of their class and volunteered for the mission out of a combination of patriotism and ambition. "So we're the Magnificent Seven," Marcus said during their first group meal. 7 pilots to take on an entire alien empire. 7 pilots to die for the cause, Rodriguez corrected grimly. "Let's not pretend this is anything else." Sarah studied her teammates as they talked, trying to understand their motivations. Marcus seemed driven by intellectual curiosity about the enemy. Rodriguez was fueled by revenge for his lost family. Vasquez carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived impossible situations before. The younger pilots radiated nervous energy, their bravado masking obvious fear. "Why did you volunteer?" Vasquez asked Sarah directly. The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on learning the technology and mission parameters that she hadn't really examined her own motivations. "Someone has to do it," she said finally. "And I'm tired of losing." "That's it? You're tired of losing?" Sarah thought about the memorial wall, about her brother's messages, about the 3 colonies that had gone silent. Humanity is being hunted to extinction. Every day we don't understand our enemy is another day closer to the end. If dying gets us the information we need to fight back, then it's worth it. The conversation moved on to technical topics and mission planning, but Sarah noticed Vasquez watching her with new interest. After the meal, the older pilot approached her privately. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," Vasquez said. "Focused on the mission, willing to sacrifice everything for the greater good. But I learned something during my years as a test pilot that might help you." "What's that?" "The best way to complete a suicide mission is to survive it." Sarah frowned. "That doesn't make sense." Hayes was clear that extraction isn't possible. Hayes told us what Fleet Command wants us to believe, but I've been studying the technical specifications of these ghost fighters, and they're more capable than the official reports suggest. Vasquez glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. The matter, antimatter drives have enough power for a round trip if you're careful with consumption. The stealth systems could theoretically hide us from pursuit if we avoid direct engagement. You're talking about coming back alive. I'm talking about completing the mission and living to share what we learn firsthand, instead of trusting it all to quantum burst transmissions that might not get through. Vasquez leaned closer. The others are planning to go out in a blaze of glory. You and I are going to be smarter than that. The training intensified over the following days. Sarah learned to push the ghost fighter to its limits, threading through asteroid fields at impossible speeds and hiding from simulated enemy patrols. The neural interface became second nature, allowing her to pilot the ship with thought alone while her hands remained free for other tasks. The most challenging part was learning to manage the stealth systems. The adaptive camouflage required constant adjustment based on local conditions, and the electromagnetic dampening field had to be precisely calibrated to avoid detection. Too little stealth and enemy sensors would spot her immediately. Too much and the ship's own systems would begin to malfunction. Think of it like playing dead in a forest full of predators, Chief Morgan explained during one training session. You need to become part of the background, just another piece of space debris drifting through the void. Sarah practiced the technique until she could make her ship effectively invisible to sensors while maintaining enough power for basic life support and navigation. It was a delicate balance that required constant attention and split-second decision-making. On their final night before launch, the 7 volunteers gathered for what everyone understood would be their last meal together. The conversation was subdued, filled with the unspoken knowledge that most of them would be dead within a week. I want to propose a toast, Marcus said, raising his cup of synthetic alcohol. To the Magnificent 7, and to the intelligence we're going to gather. May our deaths serve a purpose. To humanity, Rodriguez added solemnly. They drank in silence, each lost in private thoughts about home, family, and the mission ahead. Sarah found herself thinking about her call sign and what it had come to represent. Eagle-7 wasn't just about being shot down 7 times anymore. It was about getting back up 7 times. It was about refusing to quit when everything seemed hopeless. Later that night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling and reviewing her mission parameters one final time. Her target was designated Sector 7, a region near the galactic core where hegemony activity had been detected but never confirmed. Intelligence suggested it might be a major staging area for their fleet operations, making it a high-priority target for reconnaissance. Her personal communicator remained silent. All external communications had been restricted for the past week to prevent security leaks, meaning she couldn't contact her family before launch. The isolation was meant to help volunteers focus on the mission, but it also served to cut their emotional ties to the world they were leaving behind. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept racing with technical details and tactical scenarios. Tomorrow she would climb into her ghost fighter and disappear into enemy territory, carrying humanity's hopes into the darkness. Whether she returned alive or simply transmitted her final discoveries back to Earth, she would finally understand what lay beyond the red zones on the star charts. Eagle-7 was ready to fly into the unknown, but for the first time since volunteering, she found herself hoping that Vasquez was right about survival being possible. The mission was important, but coming home alive to share what she learned might be even more valuable. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but humanity had one advantage their enemies didn't understand. They never gave up, especially when everything seemed hopeless. Tomorrow would prove whether that was enough. The launch bay hummed with nervous energy as the 7 ghost fighters prepared for deployment. Sarah ran through her final systems check, her hands moving automatically across the neural interface controls while her mind focused on the mission ahead. The sleek black ship felt alive beneath her fingertips, responding to her thoughts with an almost organic fluidity. Eagle-7. This is Control, came Commander Hayes' voice through the comm system. All systems show green. Are you ready for launch? Sarah took a deep breath. tasting the recycled air of her life support system. In a few minutes, she would be breathing the same air for what might be the rest of her life. Eagle-7 ready for launch, Control. Copy that. Remember your mission parameters: observe, record, transmit. Intelligence gathering is the priority. Avoid direct engagement unless absolutely necessary. Hayes paused. Good hunting, Eagle-7. The launch sequence initiated automatically, guided by the ship's artificial intelligence. Sarah felt the familiar pressure of acceleration as magnetic catapults hurled her fighter into space. But the sensation was different in the ghost ship. The advanced inertial dampeners made the launch feel almost gentle, like being carried by invisible hands. Within minutes, she was clear of the orbital platform and accelerating toward the edge of human space. Around her, the other 6 fighters were following their own trajectories, each heading toward a different sector of hegemony territory. Soon they would be too far apart to maintain communication, making this a truly solitary mission. The journey to Sector 7 would take 3 days at maximum acceleration. Sarah used the time to review everything known about her target area and practice with the stealth systems. The Ghost Fighter's sensors picked up traces of hegemony presence long before she reached the official boundary of their territory. Exotic energy signatures, gravitational anomalies that suggested massive ships moving in formation, and the electromagnetic echoes of alien communication systems. On the second day, she detected her first clear sign of enemy activity. A patrol of 3 hegemony vessels passed within sensor range, their hulls gleaming with an oily iridescence that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Sarah activated her stealth systems and drifted silently past them, her heart pounding as she got her first close look at the enemy. The ships were beautiful in a disturbing way, organic curves flowing seamlessly into crystalline structures that pulsed with internal energy. They moved with a grace that human vessels couldn't match, as if swimming through space rather than flying through it. Most unsettling was their complete silence. No engine noise, no electromagnetic emissions, nothing to indicate how they achieved their impossible maneuverability. Sarah recorded everything, her ship's sensors capturing detailed scans of hull composition, energy signatures, and movement patterns. This was exactly the kind of intelligence Fleet Command needed, and she had gathered it without being detected. The mission was already a success, but she was still days away from her primary target. Sector 7 proved to be unlike anything in the intelligence briefings. Instead of a staging area for military operations, Sarah found herself observing what could only be described as a construction project on a galactic scale. Massive structures were being assembled in deep space, each one larger than Earth's moon and connected to its neighbors by streams of energy that bridged the vacuum between them. The builders were clearly not the same species as the patrol ships. These vessels were geometric rather than organic, constructed from materials that reflected light in impossible ways. They moved with mechanical precision, following patterns that suggested a hive mind or collective intelligence directing their actions. Sarah maneuvered her ship closer, using asteroids and debris fields for cover as she recorded the construction process. The aliens were building something that defied human understanding of physics, a network of interconnected structures that seemed to be reshaping local space-time itself. Energy readings from the construction sites showed power outputs that exceeded anything in human experience. "What are you building?" she whispered to herself, watching as another massive component was moved into position by invisible forces. The answer came sooner than expected. As the latest section was integrated into the network, Sarah's sensors detected a sudden spike in gravitational distortion. Space itself seemed to ripple around the alien structures, and for a moment she thought she saw stars in the distance shift position slightly. Then she understood. The hegemony wasn't just conquering human space, they were rebuilding it. The network was some kind of massive engineering project, designed to alter the fundamental structure of the galaxy itself. The implications were staggering. If they could manipulate space-time on this scale, human technology was even more obsolete than anyone had realized. Sarah began transmitting her data immediately, using the quantum burst system to send compressed packages of information back toward human space. The transmission process was slow and energy-intensive, requiring her to remain stationary for extended periods while maintaining stealth. Each data package increased her risk of detection, but the intelligence was too important to delay. On her fourth day in Sector 7, disaster struck. While transmitting a particularly large data file containing detailed scans of the construction network, Sarah's stealth systems detected an incoming sensor sweep. Something was actively searching for her, methodically combing the asteroid field where she had taken cover. The hunter was unlike anything she had seen before. It moved with the organic grace of the patrol ships but radiated the cold precision of the construction vessels. Sarah watched through her passive sensors as it eliminated hiding places one by one, its search pattern clearly designed to flush out concealed observers. Sarah had two choices: abort the transmission and run, losing critical intelligence in the process, or complete the upload and hope her stealth systems could hide her from whatever was hunting her. The decision was easy. The data about the construction network was too valuable to abandon. She maintained position and continued transmitting, her fingers dancing across the neural interface controls as she refined her stealth parameters. The adaptive camouflage struggled to match the complex electromagnetic background of the asteroid field, while the dampening fields worked to minimize her ship's signature. The hunter passed, within 100 meters of her position, its sensors probing for any sign of an intruder. Sarah held her breath as alien technology swept over her hiding spot, sophisticated detection systems analyzing every piece of debris in the area. For a terrifying moment, the hunter paused. Sarah's threat display showed the alien ship adjusting its position for a more detailed scan, its weapon systems charging to unknown energy levels. She prepared to abandon stealth and run, knowing that once detected she would have only minutes before reinforcements arrived. Then the data transmission completed. The quantum burst system discharged its payload toward human space in a focused beam of particles that would take weeks to arrive, but would carry the most important intelligence of the war. Sarah immediately powered down all non-essential systems and drifted like a piece of dead metal, hoping the hunter would mistake her for actual debris. The alien ship completed its scan and moved on, apparently satisfied that the area contained nothing of interest. Sarah waited 30 minutes before reactivating her systems, her hands shaking from the adrenaline rush of nearly being discovered. She had successfully transmitted the intelligence, but her mission was far from over. The construction network was only part of the picture. Somewhere in this sector was the command structure directing the entire operation, and finding it could provide even more valuable intelligence about hegemony leadership and decision-making processes. Sarah engaged her engines at minimum power and began moving deeper into Sector 7, following energy trails and communication signals toward what she hoped would be the heart of the alien operation. The construction network faded behind her as she ventured into unexplored space, her sensors probing ahead for signs of the enemy's command presence. What she found exceeded her worst nightmares. At the center of Sector 7, hidden behind layers of exotic energy fields and gravitational distortions, lay a structure that could only be described as a weapon. It was vast beyond comprehension, its purpose unmistakably destructive, and it was pointed directly at Earth. Sarah stared at the readings in horror, understanding finally why the hegemony had been systematically isolating human colonies. They weren't planning to conquer humanity, they were preparing to eliminate it entirely. The weapon she was observing could destroy entire star systems, and according to her sensors, it was nearly ready to fire. The weapon defied every principle of physics Sarah understood. It wasn't constructed from matter in any conventional sense, but rather appeared to be a controlled distortion in space-time itself, held stable by the same kind of energy fields she had observed around the construction network. The structure extended for thousands of kilometers in all directions, its core pulsing with energies that made her ship's sensors scream warnings about radiation levels that should have been instantly lethal. Sarah maneuvered her ghost fighter to a safe observation distance, using a large asteroid as a shield while she attempted to understand what she was seeing. The weapon's targeting system was already active, its exotic sensors reaching across interstellar space to lock onto distant human settlements. According to her readings, it was currently aimed at Sol System, at Earth itself. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just a weapon of war, it was a tool of genocide. The hegemony didn't want to rule humanity. They wanted to erase it completely. Every delay in the war, every negotiation attempt, every moment spent trying to understand alien motivations had been wasted time. The enemy had been building this monstrosity while human leaders still hoped for diplomatic solutions. Sarah began recording everything, her ship's sensors working overtime to capture technical specifications and energy readings. The data was complex beyond anything human science had encountered, but Fleet Command's best minds might be able to extract useful information about vulnerabilities or countermeasures. The quantum burst transmitter showed it would take 47 minutes to upload this data package, far longer than any previous transmission. Sarah knew she couldn't remain stationary for that long without being detected, but she also knew this intelligence was too critical to delay. If humanity was going to have any chance of survival, they needed to know about this weapon immediately. She began the transmission and settled in to wait, her eyes fixed on the passive sensor display for any sign of approaching threats. The alien construction activity continued around the weapon, with geometric ships making final adjustments to targeting systems and power conduits. Based on the intensity of their work, Sarah estimated the weapon would be ready to fire within days. 20 minutes into the transmission, her worst fears were realized. Multiple contacts appeared on her sensors, all converging on her position with the purposeful movement of a coordinated search pattern. The hunters had found her. Sarah watched the alien ships approach with a mixture of terror and fascination. These weren't the organic patrol vessels or geometric construction ships she had observed before. These were clearly military units, their hulls bristling with weapon systems and sensor arrays designed for combat. They moved with predatory grace like sharks closing in on wounded prey. The lead hunter was close enough now for detailed scans. Sarah recorded its specifications while preparing for what she knew would be her final moments. The alien ship was roughly twice the size of her ghost fighter, armed with energy weapons that operated on principles she couldn't identify. Most disturbing was its sensor suite, which seemed capable of detecting even her advanced stealth systems. With 30 minutes remaining on the transmission, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of running or hiding, she powered up her ship's engines and accelerated directly toward the lead hunter. The ghost fighter's neural interface translated her aggressive intent into action, the ship responding like an extension of her own body as she closed the distance between predator and prey. Sarah had learned something important during her years of being shot down in simulations. Sometimes the best defense was an unexpected offense. The alien hunter's reaction was immediate and telling. Its weapon systems activated, but the targeting solution seemed confused by her direct approach. The ship had been designed to hunt fleeing prey, not engage opponents who charged straight at them. Sarah used this moment of uncertainty to study the alien's weapon systems at close range, her sensors recording everything. At the last possible moment, she veered away, using the ghost fighter's superior maneuverability to avoid the hunter's energy discharge. The alien weapon missed by mere meters, its exotic beam carving through space where her ship had been microseconds before. The miss told her something crucial. The hegemony's targeting systems, while advanced, could be confused by unpredictable movement patterns. Sarah looped back toward her hiding spot behind the asteroid, the alien hunter in pursuit. She had bought herself perhaps 5 minutes, but the transmission still needed 25 more to complete. The other hunters were closing in rapidly, their search pattern tightening around her position. As she dove behind the asteroid's bulk, Sarah noticed something she had missed before. The rock wasn't entirely natural. Sections of its surface showed signs of artificial modification, ancient scars that suggested previous mining or construction activity. More importantly, her sensors detected hollow spaces within the asteroid, chambers that might provide better concealment than surface hiding. Without hesitation, Sarah found a crack in the asteroid's surface and guided her ship inside. The ghost fighter slipped through the narrow opening into a vast internal cavity, evidence of extensive mining operations that must have taken place centuries ago. The chamber was large enough to hide a dozen ships, and the dense rock walls would help mask her emissions from external sensors. The hunters arrived at her last known position within minutes, their search beams probing the asteroid field methodically. Sarah watched from deep inside the hollowed-out rock as alien ships moved past her hiding place, their sensors detecting nothing more than ancient mining residue and natural ore deposits. The transmission continued, each passing minute, bringing humanity closer to receiving the most important intelligence of the war. Sarah used the time to study the weapon's technical specifications more closely, looking for anything that might suggest a weakness or vulnerability. What she found was both encouraging and terrifying. The weapon was indeed powerful beyond imagination, capable of destroying entire star systems by collapsing their gravitational fields. But it was also incredibly complex, requiring precise coordination between thousands of components spread across vast distances. The targeting system alone involved calculations that pushed the limits of even alien technology. More importantly, the weapon appeared to require a significant charging period between shots. The energy requirements were so enormous that firing it would drain power from the entire construction network, leaving the hegemony temporarily vulnerable. If human forces could somehow survive the first shot and strike back immediately, they might have a chance. The transmission completed just as the hunters began expanding their search pattern. Sarah powered down all non-essential systems and waited in the darkness of her asteroid hideout, listening to alien communications traffic as the enemy tried to locate the spy who had infiltrated their most secret installation. Hours passed before the hunters finally gave up and departed. Sarah remained hidden until her sensors confirmed they had moved beyond detection range, then carefully emerged from the asteroid chamber. The weapon was still there, still aimed at Earth, still preparing for humanity's destruction. But now Sarah faced an impossible choice. Her mission was complete. She had gathered intelligence that could save the human race and successfully transmitted it to Fleet Command. According to her orders, she should continue operating until her ship was destroyed or her life support failed. But Vasquez's words echoed in her mind. The best way to complete a suicide mission was to survive it. The data she had transmitted would take weeks to reach human space, and even then it would need to be analyzed and understood before any response could be mounted. But if Sarah could somehow make it home alive, she could deliver the intelligence immediately and provide tactical insights that might make the difference between survival and extinction. The journey back to human space would be even more dangerous than her infiltration. The hegemony was now actively searching for intruders, and her ship's power reserves were limited. But Sarah had learned something important about their technology. It was powerful but not infallible. The aliens made assumptions about human behavior, and those assumptions could be exploited. Sarah plotted a course toward the edge of Sector 7, avoiding known patrol routes and construction zones. Her ship moved like a ghost through the alien territory, slipping past sensors and patrols with growing confidence. The neural interface made evasion almost intuitive, allowing her to feel the electromagnetic landscape around her and find the gaps where detection was impossible. 3 days later, she reached the boundary of hegemony space without being detected again. Ahead lay the journey home, fraught with its own dangers but offering something she had never expected when she volunteered for this mission: hope. Eagle-7 had not only survived her encounter with the enemy, she had learned their greatest secret and lived to share it. The weapon threatening Earth was real and terrible, but it was not invincible. Humanity still had time to prepare, still had a chance to fight back. As Sarah accelerated toward home, she allowed herself to think about her brother's messages, about seeing her parents again, about the possibility that her call sign might finally represent something other than failure. The return journey tested every skill Sarah had learned during her years of training. Hegemony patrols had tripled in frequency since her infiltration, their search patterns more sophisticated and unpredictable. The aliens knew someone had penetrated their deepest secrets, and they were determined to prevent that intelligence from reaching human space. Sarah's ghost fighter had become her second skin during the long days of travel. The neural interface allowed her to pilot by instinct alone, feeling the gravitational currents and electromagnetic fields that filled interstellar space. She learned to think like her ship, becoming one with the advanced stealth systems that kept her invisible to alien sensors. On the 5th day of her return journey, Sarah encountered something that changed everything. A human distress signal, weak and intermittent, broadcast on emergency frequencies that should have been impossible to detect this deep in enemy territory. According to her navigation systems, the signal was coming from a location that had been marked as a dead system for over a year. Every instinct told her to ignore it and continue toward home. Her intelligence about the weapon was too important to risk on a rescue mission that might be a trap, but the signal included authentication codes that identified it as coming from the lost colony ship Meridian, which had disappeared during the evacuation of the Kepler 438 system. Sarah altered course toward the signal source, her conscience winning over military logic. If human survivors were trapped in hegemony space, she couldn't abandon them to save her own mission. The dead system was a graveyard of shattered worlds and debris fields. Whatever had happened here, it had been thorough and devastating. Planets had been cracked open like eggs, their molten cores bleeding into space. Asteroid belts glowed with residual radiation from weapons that could vaporize continents. Sarah found the Meridian drifting in the shadow of a destroyed moon, its hull scarred but intact. The colony ship was massive, designed to carry 50,000 refugees to safety in the Outer Rim territories. Now it hung silent and dark, showing no signs of active life support or engine function. The distress signal was automated, broadcasting continuously from the ship's emergency systems. But as Sarah approached for a closer scan, her sensors detected something impossible. Life signs. Hundreds of them, clustered in the ship's central sections where emergency shelters would be located. Sarah, docked her ghost fighter to the Meridian's emergency airlock and made her way through corridors that told a story of desperate survival. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows, and the air recyclers were working at minimal capacity. The ship had been running on backup power for months, its crew performing miracles of engineering to keep their passengers alive. She found the survivors in the main refugee bay, a vast chamber that had been converted into a makeshift city. Families huddled around heat sources. Children played with improvised toys, and elderly colonists shared stories to pass the long hours of waiting. They had created a functioning community in the belly of a dying ship, sustained by nothing but human stubbornness and mutual support. Captain Maria Santos met Sarah at the entrance to the bay, her uniform worn but her bearing still proud. "Lieutenant," she said, reading Sarah's rank insignia, "you're the first military personnel we've seen since the evacuation began. Are you here to get us out?" Sarah felt her heart sink. "Captain, I'm on a reconnaissance mission. My ship can only carry one person, and I'm already operating beyond my fuel margins." Santos's expression didn't change. "Then why did you stop?" "Because you're human," Sarah replied simply. "Because we don't leave our people behind." The captain smiled grimly. "That's what I hoped you'd say. Come with me, Lieutenant. There's something you need to see." Santos led her through the refugee areas to a sealed section of the ship that required command authorization to enter. Inside, Sarah found what remained of the Meridian science team working frantically over jury-rigged equipment and alien artifacts. "We didn't just survive here," Santos explained. "We've been studying the enemy. Dr. Chen, show her what you've discovered." Dr. Patricia Chen looked up from a workstation covered with exotic devices that definitely weren't human technology. She was elderly, her hair white and her hands shaking from months of inadequate nutrition, but her eyes burned with scientific passion. "We've been analyzing hegemony technology for 8 months, Dr. Chen said. What we've learned could change the entire war. Their power systems, their communication networks, their weapon designs, they all have a critical flaw." Sarah leaned closer, her pulse quickening. "What kind of flaw?" "They're dependent on quantum entanglement for coordination. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of equipment is connected to central command through entangled particle pairs. It's how they achieve such perfect coordination across interstellar distances." Dr. Chen activated a holographic display showing complex quantum equations. "But quantum entanglement is fragile. If you can disrupt the entanglement field, their entire network collapses." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're saying we can cut their communications?" "More than that. We can turn their own coordination system into a weapon against them. If we broadcast the right quantum interference pattern, we can cause cascade failures throughout their fleet. Ships would lose navigation, weapons would malfunction, even their construction projects would fall apart." Sarah stared at the research data, understanding that she was looking at humanity's salvation. The weapon threatening Earth was powerful, but it was also part of the same quantum network that Dr. Chen had discovered how to disrupt. If they could broadcast the interference pattern at the right moment, they might be able to disable the weapon entirely. "Do you have the calculations?" Sarah asked. Dr. Chen nodded toward a data storage unit. "Everything is here. Frequency specifications, power requirements, timing protocols. But you'd need to get this information to Fleet Command immediately. The weapon you discovered will be ready to fire soon." Sarah felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. Her intelligence about the weapon, combined with Dr. Chen's research on quantum disruption. gave humanity not just warning of the threat, but a way to stop it. But she still faced the same impossible problem: how to get the survivors to safety. "Captain Santos," she said slowly, "what's the status of your ship's engines?" "Offline for 6 months. We used the last of our antimatter reserves to reach this system." "But the engine framework is intact?" Santos frowned. "Yes, but without fuel we're not going anywhere." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. "Captain, how would you like to steal some alien technology?" The plan that formed in Sarah's mind was audacious beyond reason. The Ghost Fighter's matter-antimatter reactor was designed to be modular, capable of being removed from the ship and used as a portable power source. If they could adapt it to interface with the Meridian's engine systems, they might have enough power to reach human space. It would mean stripping her fighter of its primary propulsion, leaving her unable to return home independently. But 50,000 human lives, plus the most important scientific discovery of the war, was worth any personal sacrifice. "It's impossible," Santos said after Sarah explained her plan. "The power coupling systems are completely different. Human and alien technology don't interface." "They do if you're creative enough," Dr. Chen interjected, her scientific mind already working on the problem. "We've learned how to jury-rig connections to their quantum systems. With some modifications, we might be able to create a hybrid power coupling." Sarah looked around at the refugee bay, at the families who had survived impossible odds through nothing but determination and mutual support. These people represented everything humanity was fighting for: the stubborn refusal to give up, the willingness to help each other survive, the ingenuity to find solutions where none should exist. "Let's get to work," she said. The next 18 hours tested every engineering skill the survivors possessed. Sarah's Ghost Fighter was carefully disassembled, its reactor core extracted and prepared for installation in the Meridian's engine bay. Dr. Chen's team worked to adapt alien quantum interfaces to human power systems, creating hybrid technologies that shouldn't have been possible. The refugees themselves became part of the solution, their diverse skills and backgrounds providing expertise that military engineers might have lacked. Former miners understood how to handle exotic materials safely. Teachers helped coordinate work teams. Artists found creative solutions to technical problems that stumped trained scientists. As the modifications neared completion, Sarah realized she was witnessing something profound. These people had been abandoned in enemy territory, written off as casualties of war. But they had not only survived, they had turned their isolation into an opportunity for discovery. They had found humanity's salvation in the wreckage of their own tragedy. The Meridian's engines fired for the first time in months, their modified systems drawing power from alien technology and human determination in equal measure. The ship began to move, slowly at first but with growing confidence as the hybrid systems proved their worth. Sarah took her position on the bridge, her Ghost Fighter's sensors now integrated into the colony ship's navigation array. Ahead lay the journey home, carrying not just survivors but the key to humanity's victory. Eagle-7 had. The Meridian limped through space toward the edge of human territory, its jury-rigged engines straining against the demands of carrying 50,000 souls to safety. Sarah remained on the bridge during the 3-day journey, her experience with hegemony patrol patterns proving invaluable as they navigated through increasingly dangerous space. The hybrid propulsion system worked better than anyone had dared hope, but it wasn't perfect. Power fluctuations caused by the incompatible technologies required constant adjustment, and Sarah found herself acting as translator between human engineering and alien physics. The neural interface skills she had learned in the Ghost Fighter proved surprisingly useful for managing the quantum coupling systems. On the second day, they encountered their first major challenge. A hegemony patrol detected their emissions and moved to investigate 3 of the organic ships that Sarah had learned to identify as standard reconnaissance units. The Meridian was too large and slow to evade detection, leaving them with only one option: bluff their way through. Dr. Chen's research team had discovered how to mimic hegemony communication protocols during their months of study. Working frantically, they programmed the ship's transmitters to broadcast what appeared to be alien identification codes, disguising the Meridian as a captured human vessel being transported to a processing facility. Sarah watched the alien ships approach with her heart in her throat, knowing that 50,000 lives depended on a deception. built from incomplete understanding of enemy procedures. The lead patrol ship transmitted a query in the complex harmonics that served as hegemony language. Dr. Chen's improvised response seemed to satisfy them, and the aliens moved on without boarding or attacking. That was too close, Captain Santos muttered as the patrol disappeared from their sensors. It's going to get worse, Sarah warned. The closer we get to human space, the more security we'll encounter. They know someone penetrated their defenses and they're not taking any chances. The final day of the journey brought them to the disputed boundary zone between human and hegemony territory. This region had become a no-man's land of destroyed stations and drifting debris, patrolled by both sides but controlled by neither. Navigation through the area required intimate knowledge of patrol schedules and safe routes that changed daily. Sarah guided the Meridian through the maze of wreckage, using her reconnaissance training to find paths that avoided both human and alien sensors. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now smuggling humans through their own defensive perimeter, but the intelligence she carried was too sensitive to risk normal contact protocols. They finally encountered a human patrol near the ruins of Station Gamma-7, a former research outpost that had been evacuated months earlier. Sarah transmitted her authentication codes and requested immediate communication with Fleet Command, emphasizing the critical nature of her intelligence. The response came back within minutes. Eagle-7, this is Admiral Morrison aboard the Terran flagship Defiance. You are ordered to proceed immediately to coordinates 127.4 by 83.2 for debriefing. The entire fleet is standing by. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The entire fleet was waiting for her? That meant her quantum burst transmissions had reached Earth and been analyzed. Fleet Command already knew about the weapon, and they were preparing humanity's response. The coordinates led them to a massive gathering of human ships. The largest fleet Sarah had ever seen assembled in one place. Hundreds of vessels from across human space had converged on this location. Battle cruisers, destroyers, support ships, and even converted civilian transports pressed into military service. At the center of the formation hung the Defiance, Admiral Morrison's flagship and the most powerful ship in the human fleet. As the Meridian approached the flagship, Sarah could see the frantic activity throughout the fleet. Ships were being refueled and rearmed, crews were transferring between vessels, and construction ships were making last-minute modifications to weapon systems. Everyone was preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of human civilization. Admiral Morrison met Sarah personally as she disembarked from the Meridian. He was younger than she had expected, probably chosen for his position based on tactical brilliance rather than seniority. His uniform was rumpled and his eyes were bloodshot, suggesting he hadn't slept since receiving her intelligence. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, using her real name rather than her call sign. "Your transmission reached us 48 hours ago. We've had our best scientists working around the clock to analyze the data you sent about that weapon. Sir, I have additional intelligence that could change everything," Sarah said. "The survivors on the Meridian have been studying hegemony technology for months. They've discovered a way to disrupt their quantum communication network." Morrison's expression sharpened. "Show me." The next several hours passed in a blur of technical briefings and strategic planning. Dr. Chen presented her research to the fleet's top scientists, who confirmed that the quantum disruption theory was not only sound but immediately applicable. The Meridian's refugees were distributed throughout the fleet, their expertise in alien technology proving invaluable for the modifications needed to broadcast the interference pattern. Sarah found herself at the center of the planning sessions, her first-hand knowledge of hegemony operations providing crucial tactical insights. She described the weapon's location, its power requirements, and the defensive systems protecting it. Most importantly, she confirmed that the weapon was indeed part of the same quantum network that Dr. Chen had learned to disrupt. "The timing has to be perfect," Admiral Morrison explained during the final briefing. "According to your intelligence, the weapon will be ready to fire in less than 60 hours. We need to strike before they can target Earth, but we also need to wait until the quantum disruption can achieve maximum effect." The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. The human fleet would jump directly to Sector 7, using Sarah's navigation data to emerge within striking distance of the weapon. At the moment of arrival, they would broadcast Dr. Chen's quantum interference pattern, hopefully disrupting hegemony communications and defensive systems long enough to destroy the weapon before it could fire. It was a desperate gamble with humanity's survival as the stakes. If the quantum disruption failed, or if the hegemony detected their approach, the entire human fleet would be destroyed by the very weapon they were trying to eliminate. But if they succeeded, they would not only save Earth but deal the hegemony their first major defeat of the war. "There's one more thing," Admiral Morrison said as the briefing concluded. "We need someone who knows the target area to guide the fleet through the jump. Someone who's been there and can navigate the local hazards." Sarah understood what he was asking. "You want me to lead the fleet into Sector 7? "I want Eagle-7 to take us home," Morrison replied. The next day, Sarah found herself back in a ghost fighter's cockpit, this time leading the largest fleet in human history, toward a confrontation that would determine their species' fate. The neural interface felt familiar and comfortable, like returning to a favorite chair after a long absence. Behind her, hundreds of human ships prepared for the jump to Sector 7. Each vessel carried the hopes and dreams of entire worlds, manned by crews who understood they might not be coming home. But they also carried something the hegemony had never encountered: the stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. "All ships, this is Eagle-7, Sarah transmitted on the fleet command frequency. "Jump coordinates confirmed. Quantum disruption systems ready. Remember, we're not just fighting for our own survival, we're fighting for every human who will ever be born." She paused, thinking of her brother back on Earth, of the families aboard the Meridian, of all the people counting on them to succeed. "Eagle-7 is go for launch. Follow me home." The fleet jumped as one, disappearing from human space in a flash of exotic energy. When they emerged in Sector 7, they found the hegemony weapon exactly where Sarah had left it. Its massive structure aimed directly at Earth's solar system. The quantum disruption broadcast began immediately, Dr. Chen's interference pattern spreading through enemy communication networks like a virus. Across the sector, hegemony ships suddenly found themselves isolated, their coordination systems failing just as human weapons opened fire. The battle for humanity's survival had begun, and Eagle-7 was leading the charge. She had been shot down 7 times in training, but when it mattered most, when everything was on the line, she was still flying. The eagle had found her prey and she was ready to hunt.